The air in the lawyer's office was so thick with greed, you could have cut it with a knife. My brother was already picking out his new car. My sister was practicing her grieving but grateful face in the reflection of the mahogany desk. They all looked right through me, the family ghost, the black sheep they barely tolerated. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and read the final line of the will. And for the first time in my life, they all turned to look at me, because my grandfather hadn't just left me something. He'd left me everything. Lock, stock, and barrel. And the silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard.
Hey, story lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go.
But let me back up. You need to understand how we got here. Growing up in the Morrison family was like living in a corporate boardroom disguised as a home. Every dinner conversation was a performance review. Every achievement was measured against the family empire my grandfather had built from nothing, a construction company that had evolved into a real estate dynasty worth $47 million. My brother Donald was the golden boy. Harvard MBA, sharp suits, sharper tongue. He could recite profit margins like poetry and had been groomed since birth to take over Morrison Holdings. My sister Victoria wasn't far behind. Stanford Law, cutthroat negotiator, already working as the company's legal counsel at 28. And then there was me, the artist, the dreamer, the one who chose paint brushes over profit statements. Another waste of money, my father would mutter whenever my art supplies arrived. When are you going to grow up and join the real world? Family gatherings were torture chambers of passive-aggressive comments. Oh, Jackson's here, still playing with your crayons. Victoria would coo, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. The relatives would laugh. Not with me, but at me. I was the cautionary tale they told their own children. Don't be like Jackson. But there was one person who never laughed. One person who would find me in the garden during those brutal family dinners, sketching in my notebook while everyone else networked inside. Grandpa Henry. You see things differently, boy, he told me one evening when I was 16, watching me sketch the old oak tree that had stood in our yard for over a century. That's not a weakness. That's a superpower. While Donald was learning to read financial statements, Grandpa Henry was teaching me to read people. While Victoria was memorizing legal precedents, he was showing me the real history of our family, the stories that didn't make it into the official company biography. This empire wasn't built on MBA degrees, he'd whisper during his late-night visits to my room. It was built on understanding what people really want, on seeing what others miss. He told me about the early days, when he was just a 17-year-old kid with calloused hands and a borrowed truck, taking construction jobs nobody else wanted. How he'd learned to read the subtle signs that told him when a neighborhood was about to boom, when a property was undervalued, when a client was lying about their budget. Your brother sees numbers, he said. Your sister sees loopholes. But you see souls. For 20 years, we had these secret conversations. While the family dismissed me as the failure, Grandpa Henry was preparing me for something they couldn't even imagine. He died on a Tuesday in March. The family mourning lasted exactly 48 hours before the inheritance speculation began. The week before the will reading was like watching vultures circle a carcass. Donald had already started making calls to financial advisors, discussing his upcoming responsibilities. Victoria had drawn up preliminary restructuring plans for the company. My parents spoke in hushed tones about finally being able to take care of Jackson with some small inheritance, maybe enough to get him on his feet. I said nothing. I painted. The family assumed my silence was grief, or maybe just my usual antisocial behavior. They didn't know that Grandpa Henry had visited me just 2 weeks before his death, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief I'd seen since childhood. They think they know the game, he'd said, his voice weak but his spirit stronger than ever. But they've been playing checkers while we've been playing chess. Davidson and Associates had been the family law firm for 30 years. The mahogany-paneled conference room had witnessed countless Morrison business deals, but never anything like this. 23 family members packed into chairs around the massive oak table. Donald wore his most expensive suit, the one he called his power play outfit. Victoria had brought a legal pad, ready to take notes on her inheritance. Aunts, uncles, and cousins whispered among themselves, calculating their expected shares. I sat in the corner, wearing jeans and a paint-stained sweater, looking exactly like what they expected. The charity case would be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. Before we begin, I should mention that Mr. Morrison Sr. was very specific about how this will should be read. He insisted on dramatic effect. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Classic Grandpa Henry even in death. The early bequests were predictable. A few thousand to the gardener, a trust for charity, small amounts to extended family. Donald straightened his tie. Victoria clicked her pen. The main course was coming. To my son Robert and daughter-in-law Patricia, I leave my gratitude for giving me grandchildren, and my hope that they learn to see all their children's worth. My parents exchanged confused glances. That didn't sound like money. To my grandson Donald, who has worked so diligently to impress me, I leave my collection of business books, with the hope that he might one day learn that leadership comes from the heart, not the head. Donald's face went pale. Business books? Where was the company? Where were the assets? To my granddaughter Victoria, who has such a sharp legal mind, I leave my complete collection of legal documents from the early days of Morrison Holdings, so she might understand that the law serves justice, not the other way around. Victoria's pen snapped in half. The room began to shift, an electric tension building as family members realized something was very wrong. This wasn't sounding like the inheritance they'd expected. And finally, Mr. Davidson continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. To my grandson Jackson, who alone understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the courage to be authentically yourself, I leave everything else. The silence was deafening. Everything else? Donald finally croaked. Mr. Davidson nodded. Morrison Holdings, all real estate properties, investment portfolios, the family home, and liquid assets totaling approximately $47 million. Everything. The explosion of voices was immediate and violent. This is impossible. He can't be serious. Jackson doesn't know the first thing about business. There has to be a mistake. But through it all, I sat perfectly still, watching their faces transform from confusion to rage to desperation. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention, and it was intoxicating. Victoria was the first to find her lawyer voice. This will can be contested. Undue influence. Lack of mental capacity. Jackson clearly manipulated a sick old man. Actually, Mr. Davidson interrupted, pulling out another document. Mr. Morrison anticipated this reaction. He had extensive psychological evaluations done in the months before his death, all confirming his complete mental competency. He also installed security cameras in his home office during his final year, recording every conversation about the will, including several enlightening discussions between family members about what they planned to do with their inheritances. The color drained from everyone's faces. They'd all said things they thought no one would ever hear. Furthermore, the lawyer continued. He stipulated that any family member who contests the will automatically forfeits any claim to any Morrison asset, forever. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of trapped animals. Donald leaned forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Jackson, you have to understand, you can't run a company. You don't know anything about business. You'll destroy everything Grandpa built. For 30 years, I'd listened to variations of this speech. I'd absorbed their dismissal, their condescension, their absolute certainty that I was worthless. Not today. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every slight, every insult, every moment they'd made me feel invisible. When I spoke, my voice was steady and clear. You're right, Donald. I don't know anything about your kind of business, the kind that sees employees as numbers and customers as transactions. But I know Grandpa Henry's kind of business, the kind that built this empire from nothing because he understood something you never learned. I walked around the table, making eye contact with each family member who had spent decades looking through me. People aren't spreadsheets. Communities aren't market segments. And success isn't just about profit margins. I stopped in front of Donald. You want to know why Grandpa left everything to the failure? Because while you were calculating ROI, I was learning about the families who lost their homes in the 2008 crash. Families that Morrison Holdings quietly bought out below market value. While you were studying hostile takeover strategies, I was hearing about the small businesses that couldn't compete with our commercial developments. Victoria started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. For 20 years, Grandpa Henry told me stories about this company's real history. The communities we've displaced, the workers we've underpaid, the corners we've cut. He didn't tell you those stories because he was protecting you from the truth. He was protecting the truth from you. The room was dead silent now, hanging on every word. You see numbers. I see the faces behind those numbers. And that, dear family, is exactly why Grandpa Henry knew I was the only one who could be trusted with this responsibility. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Donald, Victoria, Mom and Dad, you're all fired. Effective immediately. The next 6 months were a masterclass in controlled chaos. The business world watched in fascination as the failed artist took over a multi-million-dollar empire and turned it completely upside down. My first move was to call an all-hands meeting with every Morrison Holdings employee, from executives to janitors. I stood in front of 300 people and told them the truth about our company's history, about the changes coming, and about my vision for the future. We're going to build something different, I announced. Something that makes money not despite doing the right thing, but because we do the right thing. The old guard executives, Donald's buddies from his Harvard network, quit within weeks. Good riddance. I replaced them with people who understood that business success and social responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. We started with the workers, raised minimum wages across all properties by 30%, implemented profit-sharing programs, created educational scholarships for employees' children. The labor costs went up, but worker productivity skyrocketed and turnover plummeted. Next came the communities. Instead of bulldozing neighborhoods for maximum profit developments, we started working with local residents to create mixed-income housing that preserved community character while generating sustainable returns. We established small business incubation programs in areas where we'd previously crowded out local entrepreneurs. The financial press predicted disaster. Idealistic artist will bankrupt family empire in record time, read one headline. Wall Street analysts downgraded our bonds. Competitors circled like sharks, waiting for the inevitable collapse. But something funny happened instead. We started making more money than ever. The vindication was sweeter than I could have imagined. Within a year, Morrison Holdings had increased profits by 18% while simultaneously winning community service awards and being featured in Harvard Business School case studies about sustainable capitalism. Donald, meanwhile, had taken a corporate consulting job with a mid-tier firm, making a fraction of what he'd expected to inherit. Victoria had started her own practice, specializing in corporate law, but kept losing clients to larger firms. My parents had moved to a modest condo in Florida, their retirement savings significantly smaller than they'd planned. They all called me, of course. At first, it was anger and legal threats, then bargaining, offering to help me run the company in exchange for executive positions. Finally, desperate pleading for loans, for second chances, for family loyalty. I listened to every voicemail, read every text, and then I did something that felt even better than saying no. I said yes, with conditions. Donald could have a job as an entry-level analyst working his way up like everyone else, with the same starting salary we paid recent college graduates. Victoria could handle some legal work for the company, at standard contractor rates, competing with other firms for our business. My parents could have their mortgage paid off, after they spent 6 months volunteering at the homeless shelter we'd started funding. The most beautiful part? They all said yes. Pride, it turned out, was a luxury they could no longer afford. 1 year after the inheritance, I received a final gift from Grandpa Henry, a letter that Mr. Davidson had been instructed to deliver exactly 365 days after the will reading. My dear Jackson, if you're reading this, it means you survived your first year as head of the family empire. I hope you've discovered what I always knew, that being different isn't a weakness, it's your greatest strength. I need you to know something that might shock you. This wasn't about business. This was never about business. 25 years ago, your brother Donald was 8 years old when he pushed your 5-year-old cousin Timothy into the swimming pool. Knowing he couldn't swim, Donald stood there watching him struggle until I jumped in to save him. When I confronted Donald later, he showed no remorse. I wanted to see what would happen, he said. 20 years ago, Victoria manipulated her college roommate into signing over her half of a startup business they created together, using legal technicalities to steal what should have been shared success. The roommate dropped out of school and moved back home, her dreams shattered. 15 years ago, your parents chose not to invite you to your own grandmother's funeral because they were embarrassed by your appearance and lifestyle. You never knew because I told you she'd specifically requested a private ceremony. I've watched this family my entire life, Jackson. I've seen the cruelty disguised as success, the selfishness wrapped in respectability, the complete absence of empathy for anyone who couldn't further their ambitions. You were never the black sheep, son. You were the only white sheep in a flock that had lost its way. The inheritance wasn't a reward for being different. It was a responsibility. Use it to prove that success and decency can coexist. Show them what leadership actually looks like. I love you, and I'm proud of you. Forever your co-conspirator, Grandpa Henry. P.S. Check the safety deposit box. Key is taped under your childhood desk drawer. There's one more surprise waiting. The safety deposit box contained documents that changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather's death. Medical records showing that his sudden heart attack had been preceded by months of deliberately skipped medications and refused treatments. A detailed journal of his final year, describing his decision to orchestrate his exit while his mind was still sharp enough to ensure his legacy. But the most shocking revelation was a thick folder labeled The Morrison Files. 25 years of documented evidence of my family's cruelty, not just to me, but to dozens of other people. Employees fired for no reason. Tenants evicted to make room for higher-paying renters. Small businesses destroyed by predatory practices. And then there was the final document, a sealed confession letter, witnessed and notarized. To whom it may concern, the inheritance of Jackson Morrison was not a whimsical decision or the product of manipulation. It was the result of careful observation over 7 decades of a family that lost its moral compass in pursuit of wealth. Jackson Morrison is the only member of this family who has consistently demonstrated empathy, integrity, and genuine care for others' well-being. Every other potential heir has proven, through documented actions, that they would use inherited wealth and power to cause harm. This inheritance is not a gift. It is a last desperate attempt to ensure that the Morrison name becomes associated with healing rather than harm. I go to my grave hoping that I have chosen correctly. Henry Morrison Sr. Our profit margins are healthy. Our reputation is stellar. Our impact on the communities we serve has transformed entire neighborhoods. Donald now manages one of our affordable housing projects and has started volunteering at the youth center we sponsor. Took 2 years, but he's slowly learning what leadership actually means. Victoria handles pro bono legal work for our community foundation and has started mentoring young lawyers who want to use their skills for social good. She recently called to thank me for forcing her to rediscover why she wanted to practice law in the first place. My parents spend their retirement traveling to our various project sites, documenting the positive impact of our work. Dad has become an amateur photographer, and Mom writes newsletters for our community programs. They seem happier than I've ever seen them. The family that once dismissed me as a failure now works for the empire I inherited. But here's the thing they've finally learned. I didn't inherit it because I was the black sheep. I inherited it because I never was one. I was always the white sheep in a family that had forgotten what goodness looked like. Grandpa Henry knew that the only way to save his legacy, and maybe his family, was to put it in the hands of someone who still remembered how to be human. The inheritance didn't change me, but it gave me the power to change everything else. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in Grandpa Henry's old office, looking out at the community garden we built where his mansion's old tennis court used to be, I can almost hear him chuckling. Lock, stock, and barrel. I whisper to his photograph on my desk, just like you promised. The black sheep who inherited everything? That was never the real story. The real story was about the white sheep who inherited the chance to prove that being different isn't a weakness. It's a superpower,